Oh, good. Oh, thank you. Very good deal. Oh, good. Okay. I guess I'll start then, huh? Okay. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. We'll start with a prayer from the book of Tobit. Blessed are you, O God of our fathers. Praise be your name forever and ever. Let the heavens and all your creation praise you forever. You made Adam and you gave him his wife Eve to be his help and support. And from these two the human race descended. You said it is not good for the man to be alone. Let us make him a partner like himself. Now, Lord, you know that I take this wife of mine not because of lust, but for a nobler purpose. Call down your mercy on me and on her. Allow us to live together to a happy old age. Amen. Amen. The book of Tobit. Tobit, yes. The famous prayer of chapter 8 of Tobiah and Sarah. This is a great one that I use a lot. I'm using it purposely today because of our subject matter today. But it's a great one because it's one John Paul talks about a lot in his Theology of the Body, because it's where they sanctified their one flesh union, and therefore he was the only husband to survive the wedding night. He had 7 that died approaching that. Yeah. And but also it's a great insight into prayer, the form of prayer. See, there's actually a kind of a form of prayer. Just to digress a little bit here, it's an opportunity. If you notice, when we pray, the model prayer comes from, because I find that when people pray, even spontaneous prayer, it oftentimes is more like commentary than it is prayer. And I think what can help that is to understand that there's a kind of a structure to prayer that we can see from the Bible, illustrated in the Bible. And this is an example. And that structure basically is, you start out praising God, proclaiming what He is. Then you ask for forgiveness. Then you give your petition, and then you end the way you began. It's called a doxology. Our tendency is to plow right into the gimme. I call it the gimme. Right away, come to God with gimme this, And you have to kind of butter him up first, like a parent. Like a child coming to a parent. Tell him what a great parent he is, how much you love him and all that. And oh, you're so thankful. And oh, by the way, can I have the car keys? Yeah, it follows the same model. And thank you, because I knew you'd say yes, Dad, because you're such a wonderful parent. So it's really what it is. So you see it here, the way he starts out. Blessed are you, our God, our fathers. Praise be your name. Let the heavens and all the creation rejoice. Then it says usually what God did. You made Adam and Eve. So you praise him. Then you start to kind of announce or proclaim or delineate what is so great about him. All the things he's done, God has done. And then you move into, and because of that, see, it's very logical. Because of that, oh my goodness, you put this wonderful thing in front of your face. What do you feel in relation to that? You feel small, right? You feel unworthy. So you ask for forgiveness, the contrition part. And then you ask for your petition, what you want. That's when you bring the gimme. And then end by praising him. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And then that's how you can then correct them better. They can receive correction better. In fact, I was honored I was asked to give an endorsement, the little brief endorsement for a new book that's coming out. by Gregory and Lisa Popchak. It's by Ascension Press, called Raising Sexually Holy and Whole Children, Kids, something like that. It's actually an updated version of the original one. And so I saw, the basic manuscript, and it is just wonderful. And I hope to stock it up here because I'll really be touting that one. It's wonderful. And this is one of the points they make in there. They do a beautiful job of talking about how to approach your kids on some of these, even some of these sensitive topics when they're teens or adolescents, and how to do it just like you're saying. Where you do it where it's you. They explain this very beautifully. That you affirm the child and all that, and then you want them to always show their best selves. And so, but here's where you're not doing it, and so we'd like you to do this, this, and this, like that. So anyway, they make a nice point in that book. So no, but I can find out. It's through Ascension Press, and it's a revised one of the original one they did. It's updated. It's great. It's Raising Theology by the Kids is what it is. It's one of the books that, in fact, that was in my comment, that in my endorsement, I said this is the book that every parent should reach for, because this is every parent is asking, how do I raise my kids in this? And then even they say it in there, which we've always said, that once people come to marriage preparation and come adulthood, they already had their ethos crystallized. In fact, it's by about age 6 already, and your real fundamental view on life and relationships is already starting to be crystallized by that age already. So the key is to raise your children. Like pre-Cana starts when you're born, really, so that by the time you arrive, you can't remake them in a 6-week pre-Cana course, and that's the problem. So they do an excellent job. This is the book really that how to raise kids on a theology body ethos. So anyway, it's when I read it, I was very impressed. So okay, so but it all ties in with our topic today. We're in the section of love and responsibility, and this part, and from here on out, it's going to be like I suspect the ladies will really relate to this. It's going to be like we're just going to be imagine we're going to be chewing on a mouthful of dark chocolate. I mean, it's just everything in here is just. I usually mark my book and all that, and I'm marking everything. The whole darn thing is marked. It's like every sentence, every word from here on out is just going to be so rich. Because it's going to be the stuff now. We've waded through a lot of the philosophical things and all that, and kind of a little bit of the brain busting stuff. Now it's going to get really, if you want to call it practical, the stuff. It's really going to be like really just like a mouthful of chocolate. Dark chocolate. That's why I was thinking as I was reading it. So I was like, wow, this is like a mouthful of dark chocolate. So this and all the way through, and this stuff that's really going to make people go like, wow, John Paul, he must have been married. He must have been having sex before he gets. How could he possibly know this stuff? Really.
They elected this guy Pope,
I know. It's true, because this stuff that he's writing was before, long before.
He loved the girl, the one girl.
Oh, yeah, he did. Did he? Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, he did. Yeah.
He was a theater.
Yeah. Yes, he was.
And the man who became Pope.
Yeah.
EWTN, but he did grow in this relationship without always appearing, an honor.
Yeah.
She loved him, and then she married and went to Canada or the United States. And I think in Credo she was going to come back. She got sick. He prayed for her. Tuberculosis or lungs, and he prayed, and God was healed. She was cured. Her husband didn't tell her after childbirth that she had lung cancer, and the doctor gave her that she was cured. So he was praying, and in the movie, you can see that she must have faith.
Yeah. Great. So it's again, and there is an example of, and it's good for pre-seminarians, people in that area, discernment, that you can love, you can so-called fall in love, but it's not. We make it out to be an either or decision. but it's one that rather than an either or, it's like it's more or less taking that love to its ultimate perfection. And so everybody wins in it, even though it may be painful it's hard to understand it at the moment, especially for the girl, because for the girl, the end basically, because again, they're designed for a relationship. It's to culminate in a relationship, and it seems to her like this is going outside the relationship or drifting away from it, but it's actually taking the relationship and taking it to its ultimate perfection. So it can start out with the so-called love or falling in love, but it doesn't have to be a choice of either or. Like, well, I gotta say goodbye to this now, and never, it's we make it out to be either or. And I think it's one of these things. His example and all that he's saying here, love and responsibility, theology, body. This is why more and more I'm being asked to speak to seminarians and seminaries because um, this is how they really, especially you're being formed for the celibate vocation. This is how you really can negotiate through that in a very healthy and whole way, rather than this sort of either or way, or that when you encounter these things, so many. If this was around more in the 60s and 70s, would we have lost so many, priests that I fell in love, so I had to leave the priesthood. No, you didn't. You had to wade through it and take that to. There's nothing wrong with so-called falling in love. It's going to happen all the time, you know. It's so-called falling in love. I like Scott Peck's definition of falling in love. He says it's nature's way of conning us into preserving the species, which I think is true, because it's so irrational. It's just, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's irrational, in a sense. So take that to its rational, ultimate. It doesn't have to be an either or. It's more or less. And I do that with a lot of people in work in all their counts, not just priests and seminarians, but people in relationships and marriages. So oftentimes, a relationship, it's about modifying it, not necessarily ending it, but transforming it, taking it to it's like he said, like we've been reading about him talking about the raw material of love. You're experiencing the raw material of love, which is profoundly powerful. But the idea is that people stop there, and that was one of the points we've made in the last few months here in our sessions together, that people stop at the raw material and think they have to, then there's a departing. Okay, the love is all the raw material, and if that can't be, then you have to leave that person behind or that relationship. When actually it's the raw material is the raw material, which means it needs to be refined into its ultimate thing. So encountering love, so-called falling in love, no matter who you are, is only the beginning, and that relationship can be refined. It can actually become a very significant one. As it metamorphosizes, as it transfigures into it started here, but it can be over here. If you're willing to work with that. If not, you just sort of kind of gradually go your separate ways. It's not this big heartbreak thing, or the either or thing.
What about a spouse forced into celibacy because a wounded spouse can't respond, not understanding how to survive the earth when masturbation is wrong?
Oh.
And the opposite.
Yeah, it's a good question. Very good question. So what they're saying is that one person isn't complying with their part of the marital duties and complementarity of and so that other person is trying to endure that urge and compensate. Yeah. Well, the thing there is, no, you can never masturbation or anything like that would never be justified. It would be understandable. In other words, it would be like, pastorally, you would need a lot of compassion and spiritual direction in that. But it's an understandable recourse, but not a correct one. What you want to do is to help the person, urge the person, if they're, taking guidance on this, to try to achieve intimacy in other ways, even with that spouse, and try to get to more and more the root of it all, And then beyond all that, we have to realize that everyone is going to have some kind of, I like the word, like Christopher West uses the term, ache. Everyone's going to have some form of ache in that part of their life. To varying degrees. Maybe not, maybe hardly at all. Maybe someone a great one. But that ache, like all aches in life, can be redemptive, can be part of our redemption if we see it that way. So it's kind of a combination of things spiritually. It takes some spiritual direction and guidance to sift through that, to walk through that. It's a very good question because it's a problem I come up with a lot in marriages today, where one or the other isn't they're not enjoying the kind of harmony in that area of their life that they could. One or the other is because one or the other has some things going on, and what to do. You can never justify doing the wrong thing. You have to try and negotiate through this by trying to, with greater spiritual insight, and doing the right thing, which is harder, but more rewarding, and also, like I said, there'll never be a complete absence of the ache. We just have to accept that. We're never going to be completely fulfilled. It's just in varying degrees, on this earth.
Is that psychological and or spiritual?
Well, it's psychological and spiritual, at least for me, and my approach and what I think is always united, always together. You have to work on it together. They're really, even though they're different entities, just like our body and soul, they're not separated. You can't really separate them out. Again, you recognize the different entities, but you never say, okay, I'm just going to work with you psychologically, or work with you spiritually. They're absolutely wedded. So you have to. That's why I like to use the term psycho-spiritual. Everything really is like psycho-spiritual. Because psyche really refers to our soul, and spirit, the part that makes us, alive, human, the part that makes us our unique personality as a human being, that character that makes us human, our soul. But spirit actually refers to the spirit within us, the Holy Spirit, kind of like the perfection of the psyche. Psyche means like the soul. So that's why they're wedded together. So you have to, the spiritual kind of, the psyche, the soul, informs the spirit, and the spirit nourishes the soul. So you have to work on them on both levels. That's why the best healing, the best counseling, and whenever I need to refer someone, if I'm working with them, I think I need to refer them to somebody, I'm very, very solicited, very judicious in that, and very hesitant, because I will only turn someone over to another counselor who has, whether it's a psychiatrist, whatever, who I know works from the position of a psycho-spiritual. Because otherwise there just is not going to be the healing is not really going to happen without that. You cannot deal with anything, because ultimately Christ is the healer. Christ is the divine physician. And really all healing comes about by bringing Christ, or bringing the person, immersing them in Christ. And all that means, which means it goes beyond technique, it goes beyond psychotropic drugs. It may include some of that, but it goes well beyond that. And that's what ultimately heals. So, okay. But it's a great question. Very, very good question. One that comes up often today because of, our sexually neurotic, dysfunctional culture, which is in marriage, unfortunately, many marriages. Okay, page 211. Marriage, monogamy, and the indissolubility of marriage. What's that? Yes. Some great stuff here about answering this whole thing about bigamy or polygamy and so on. And great insights as usual. about the fourth line down on page 211. If a person can never in any circumstance be a mere object of enjoyment for another person, but can only be the object, or rather the co-subject, of love, the union of man and woman needs a suitable framework, one which permits the full development of the sexual relationship while ensuring the durability of their union. Such a union is, of course, called a marriage. Attempts to solve the problem of marriage, and other than by monogamy, which implies indissolubility, are incompatible with the personalistic norm and fall short of its strict demands, in that they put one person in the position of an object to be enjoyed by another. The woman in particular is in danger of becoming a mere object of enjoyment for the man. Now, I always preach never to keep score, especially in love relationships, but we're going to keep score today. That was first point in what you'll see is the anti-maleness of the church and the pro-woman of the church. People, there's the first deference to a woman in there. You can count how many there are in what we're going to read today, okay? Just for fun. I'm just sort of being sarcastic about, accusing the church of being, chauvinistic and all that. But you'll see quite the opposite in here. The woman in particular is in danger of becoming a mere object of enjoyment for the man. This is what happens where polygyny, the union of a man with several women, which is what we usually mean by polygamy, is practiced. The history of mankind also, of course, furnishes examples of polyandry, the converse of polygamy, the union of man, a woman with more than one man. Okay, we shall consider marriage here mainly in light of the personalistic norm, which bids us show loving kindness and treat a person in a manner appropriate to his or her essential nature. This principle is fully compatible only with monogamy and the indissolubility of marriage. In other words, what he's saying is that if you take, as he's going to show here, he'll make a comment later, we'll see. If you take, and again, this is a good answer for our non-Catholics, our critics, all that. And people even say, what's wrong with polygamy? It's in the Bible, Well, let's face it, we're coming dangerously close to legalizing it anyway. As soon as you redefine marriage, with the same-sex thing, then it's fair game. Everything is. Yeah, your sister. Yeah, exactly. Sure, why not? As long as they love each other, why not? That's So he's saying that these words indissolubility let's see. And marriage, if you take those words itself, okay, marriage has to be monogamous because that's the only framework that will allow what marriage is to actually flourish. It's almost like saying you have to plant a seed in a soil. You can try putting it somewhere else, but it's the soil that will allow it to become, that's the framework, allow it to become what it's supposed to become. We're trying to say in our culture, you can put that seed anywhere. And we expect it to, to grow, or whatever happens to it, we call that, we're just calling that, valid. Because of the nature, and he'll show you later, we're going to see where he says, even aside from, this is a part I really like, when he gets in saying, even as, just like this Pope does, even aside from faith, just pure reason, just pure looking at the natural order, looking at what something is, again, like the theology, this is where theology body comes in. What is something? What is the need of the human person? Who are we? What does it mean when we give ourselves in a relationship that we call marriage? Just looking at that rationally will bring you to the conclusion, if you look at it indeed rationally and contemplatively, in other words, looking at it for what it really is, ultimately will bring you to the conclusion that marriage can only be monogamous. Because if marriage is a total gift of self, you only have one self to give. You cannot give in this way, that the kind of total self-donative way of marriage, you can only do that with one person. So if that's true, then polygamy and those other things, as you'll see, becomes really very utilitarian. It ends up being for other reasons and not for what marriage is. Even though we call it marriage. Oh, he's married to many wives. No, he's not married. It's impossible. He's calling it that, but it's impossible. Same thing with the whole same-sex thing. This is why we Catholics can see right away that same-sex thing is absurd, because we know that this means, marriage means this. It can only be this. It's impossible to call it this.
I think even sometimes when a spouse loses a spouse, and they might remarry later, they always know that first spouse was the one, and I witnessed this, and I have a sister who's now a widow, but she only has one spouse who's in heaven, and she lives with me kind of hard with him, and she doesn't see any other. She wants only to marry, and he is going to be her spouse even in heaven. She's never going to give up. Young, 50 years old, you know.
As a man, I have to admit, I find that to be one of the most beautiful things about womanhood. I see that in a lot of women, because as a priest, you deal with widows a lot. More widows than widowers, you know. And the statistics are most widows do not remarry. Widowers, most of them, vast majority, are married within 3 years. Are remarried within 3 years. Yeah. And in my yeah and in my work with people over the years in my priesthood, I see that to be absolutely true. Absolutely true. The men lose their wives, and boy, they have to get another one. A year, 2 years, by 3 years, max, they're remarried. The women will go forever. And I know I have widows in my parish. They'll say they'll always for that one husband, and they never remarry. Okay, now there's a great passage we're going to get to in here. And one of the reasons why I love this passage, it's about exactly what you said. It's a profound, beautiful passage, beautiful point. One of the reasons I like it too is because it also overlaps with, it's close to my heart, because as an Eastern Catholic priest, we don't say in the East, till death do you part. We say, till death unite you forever. And if we think about that, it sounds like we're saying two opposite things, but we're really not. There's always East and West converge at the same point. They just come at it by different ways. And oh, that's a phone. Okay. So we'll get into that later. But what it's showing is, and he mentions it here, and it's even the Western theology. Remember, second marriages in the church, East and West, are something which are really, and even as he refers to St. Paul, tolerated in a sense, to use the word tolerated. In other words, because marriage is for this earth, and it's a need for this earth, this side of eternity, there's a part of it that ends on this side of earth, but there's a part of it that continues on, because it's marriage in Christ, in the Spirit of Christ. In other words, in Christ is the God of living and the dead. So what happens here, sacramentally, has an eternal dimension. So that's why it's a beautiful thing that especially with women, when they remain loyal to their first husband, what's really happening is first of all, they're doing what Paul encouraged them to do, and also they're living out this spiritual reality of the sacrament, that it does, death unites you forever. It separates you on earth, and you're free to remarry it's for human need. But it's not like, okay, that marriage is done, over, no connection, now I got this other marriage. It's, you may marry now, because this is a temporary, marriage is meant to be temporary for this earth. But there's a spiritual dimension to it that is eternal. That's why St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, like he said, I would rather, if you're a widow, stay a widow. I'd rather have you stay that way. Better to stay that way. In the Eastern Church, a second marriage is actually done as a penitential, has a penitential tone to it. It's like a concession, like a what do you call, well, okay, if you really have to, we'll let you, but we're not going to hip parade this and all that, And that's why even when I do marriages of couples who got annulments and they're getting married a second time, and I know them or I knew their first marriage, whatever, it's just it's a little weird, If they do it just like it's marriage all over again, the whole thing, like going through it the second time again, the exact same way. Something just says that it should be a little different, a little bit downplay, a little bit more, because it is a concession. It's a concession to life on this earth. It's not this thing where, okay, he's dead, she's gone, man, you are free to be married. Yes, you are free legally in the eyes of the church, but not. It doesn't mean that all has died and ended with that.
Talk about that at the top.
Poor Sarah was never consummated.
Yeah, yeah, it was never. Yeah, it was never consummated, and also that book is still within the time of the old law, which then that whole time, as we'll see in here, again, it's another section to get to. Like I said, we're just chocolates, man, just coming out of our mouth, right? It's like one of those things
Right, so online, there's no marriage in heaven. And then this is hard when one unbelieving spouse does not believe in heaven. So, no bright hereafter, will not know the other spouse, so why live for that? Why live for the afterlife?
Well, there's two questions there, actually. One, there's no marriage in heaven. You need to add another phrase that, as it is on earth. Because heaven itself, remember, is a marriage, the wedding feast of the Lamb. It is the ultimate marriage. But it's a marriage that is not exclusive, it is inclusive. In other words, someone who's married to their same spouse in heaven, still united to them spiritually, is united to them but not exclusively. It's not just my husband and I. It's him, us, me, and everyone together. And where do we experience that on earth? We actually experience. Very good. Excellent. Eucharist. We become one body, and all those boundaries kind of break down and open up to the fact that we're, in a sense, become one spouse together and unite ourselves with the bridegroom Christ. So heaven, the Mass, is the closest we get to heaven on this earth, the Eucharist. Now, the second part of her question is, so there is marriage in heaven, but not as it is on earth. That's what Christ meant. It's not like what you think on earth. It's the ultimate. It's actually a virginal marriage, where it's very inclusive. Just like sister here, sister is in a sense espoused in a inclusive way. She is not her spouse is Christ, which means the whole world, and specifically the church, is her spouse, collectively as one. She lives by her celibate virginity. She lives as spouse mystically for all, not just for one. The place in the world for single women, good question. He mentions that in here too. So I'm going to get back to that because I want to get back into because all your questions are in the. I just want to get back into the. He says it better than I do. So. All right, so we'll go into. Okay, let's continue. I have some highlights here, but I think these sections we're going to have to read every part of it. If that's okay, we're just going to get right to the text but there are sections I'll highlight. A lot of times I'll skip because to get to the point of it, But these are so rich, I just need to read it through. So it'll take us maybe a little longer, but it's, like I said, it's like chewing on a thick piece of black chocolate. Okay. Okay, the bottom of 211, where I left off. It is fundamentally opposed to all forms of polygamy, whether polygyny or polyandry. It is likewise opposed in principle to the dissolution of marriage. In effect, in all these cases, a person is put in the position of an object for use by another person. Marriage itself is then only, or at any rate mainly, an institutional framework within which a man and a woman obtain sexual pleasure, and not a durable union of persons based on mutual affirmation of the value of the person. Now, another thing I want to stop here and warn again, as I often do here, the so-called conservative Catholic, or the ones that are trying to kind of bring back the old or pre-Vatican II, whatever, the good old days of the church. You got to be careful again. I keep cautioning that because during that time there was this thinking, and even today some of them have it, is that marriage basically, you abstained, and then once you got married, basically it was just a license for, it was legitimizing your sexuality, your like sexual pleasure is now legitimized. Certification. A kind of that's why the secularists would, in criticizing us, they'd call it legalized prostitution. Yeah, that's really banal and all that. But their point was that, oh, you're just taking the same act, and this church says it's legal now. Well, there was a certain kind of ethos of that in the so-called old church, which was a little rough on women. And so it's not that. It does give legitimacy to the sexual act, as he'll say in here, but it's not legitimacy meaning, okay, it's okay now. Legitimacy means it gives a framework for the sexual act now to have its full meaning. Get the difference? For a lot of old time Catholic, it was the idea of okay, this, and that's why a lot of people today, a lot of people think, and that's why they'll come to me when there's problems. They'll say, "Oh, I thought marriage is like, you abstain and all that, but once you get married, anything goes." No, no. It's not just the church sanctioning, relegating any sexual thing to this kind of like, okay, you go in there and do what you want and close the door. It's legitimate now. We put the stamp on the door, legitimate. It's not that. Whereas outside the door, everything's wrong. But here, go inside here, we'll close the door, legitimate. No, not at all. So that's what's implied in here. For such a union must be durable, must last until one of the parties to the relationship ceases to exist. I am speaking not of a spiritual existence, which is above and outside of time, but of the existence in the body, which ends with death. Why is this so important? See the distinction already? Spiritual and physical? Because marriage is not only a spiritual, but also a physical and terrestrial union of persons. According to the answer which Christ gave the Sadducees, when they asked him what would become of marriage after the resurrection of the body, which is, of course, an article of faith, those who live anew in their bodies neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. See, that was his answer. They're like angels. They aren't angels, but they're like angels. Marriage is strictly a feature of man's physical and terrestrial existence, so that it is naturally dissolved by the death of one of the spouses. The other is then free to marry another person. In law, this is called bigamia successiva, remarriage, which must be strictly distinguished from bigamia simultanea, bigamy for short in usage, ordinary usage, which means marrying another partner while an earlier marriage is still in being. Now here comes that other part we're talking about. Although remarriage after death of a spouse is justifiable and permitted, to remain a widow or widower is nonetheless altogether praiseworthy, since among other things it emphasizes more fully the reality of the union with the person now deceased. That's the key. The value of the person, after all, is not transient, and spiritual union can and should continue even when physical union is at an end. See? In the Gospels, and especially in the Epistle of St. Paul, we find widowhood and strict monogamy praised in several places. See, there it is. And that, isn't that beautiful? And that's the overlapping part with the Eastern. That's why we say in the East, so death unites you forever. And second marriages we consider a concession. As does the West, really. But just in another way. Okay. So that's, very beautiful part. The question of monogamy in this, now someone at this point might say, like, I think it's implied in the question that on the internet there, that, well, what if things weren't so hot between the two? It's like, I don't want to stay with that guy for the rest of my life. Well, this is presupposing a sacramental marriage, that was, in the true sense. Because let's face it, you're not going to be miserable in heaven. Like, you get to heaven, it's like, oh shoot, I got to be with you the rest of the rest. This is heaven. So this is implying the oneness continues in heaven that was shared on earth, sacramentally and spiritually. The question of monogamy and indecisive of marriage is dealt with decisively and conclusively in Christ's teachings. Christ had before his eyes the fact that marriage, as instituted by the Creator, was originally strict monogamous and indissoluble. Now you see, we're going to see a lot of things where he's paving the way for a theology of the body here. What God has joined together, no man put asunder, and continually referred to it. For the memory of the polygamy of the patriarchs, now here's the interesting point, and I'll refer to something he did in Theology of the Body, the book. For the memory of the polygamy of the patriarchs, the great leaders and the kings, David and Solomon, were still alive in the traditions of his immediate audience. That goes back to your question about Tobit. The Israelites, as was the Mosaic letter of repudiation, authorizing the dissolution of the legally valid marriage in certain circumstances. Okay, so you could divorce then in the Mosaic law. And then we're talking about, like the Israelites, they say, hey, look, we're talking David, Solomon, the patriarchs, they all allowed it. That's the law. That's our faith. Then Jesus really throws them a curve, which is what John Paul used to base his entire theology of the body upon, that curveball. Christ uncompromisingly opposed these traditional usages, stressing the character of marriage as originally instituted in the primordial intention of the Creator. In the beginning, it was not so. That's the foundational point of the theology of the body. The idea of monogamous marriage, which dwelt in the mind and will of the Creator, was distorted by the chosen people as well as by others. The excuse often made for the polygamy of the patriarchs is the desire for a numerous progeny. If we accept that procreation as the objective purpose of marriage justified polygamy in the Old Testament times, it must be by analogy be an equally valid justification wherever the purpose of polygamy is the same. But at the same time, the books of the Old Testament provide sufficient evidence that polygamy is in practice conducive to the treatment of women by men as objects of enjoyment, and so at once degrades women and lowers the level of morality amongst men. So there's another check mark for women. We need to only remember the story of King Solomon. The abolition of polygamy and the reestablishment of monogamy and the indissolubility of marriage are a necessary consequence of the command to love, understood as we have understood it all along, as an embodiment of the personalistic norm. If all relationships between men and women are to be on this high level, they must develop in accordance with and embody the principle of monogamy and indissolubility, which also throws light on other aspects of the coexistence and association of men and women. Now here's a good one for answering our critics. The commandment to love, as it occurs in the Gospels, is more than the personalistic norm. It also embodies the basic law of the whole supernatural order, of the supernatural relation between God and man. This is the part I mentioned about, even if you're an atheist, you could still conclude that marriage is between man and woman, only one man and woman. Nevertheless, the paternalistic norm is most certainly inherent in it. It is the natural content of the commandment to love, that part of which we can equally well understand without faith and by reason alone. Now that is what Benedict XVI has picked up in his pontificate. He's very much into that, hey, listen, world, faith is reasonable. Faith is not hocus pocus. Faith is scientific. Yet it goes beyond it. Faith is rational and reasonable. Theology should be taught in a sense as a science, as a valid subject on college university. It's just that it goes beyond it. That's one of the great themes of the Pope today. Let us add that without it, the essentially supernatural content of the commandment cannot be fully understood or put into practice. Polygamy and the dissolution of lawful marriages, divorce, which in practice leads to polygamy, are incompatible demands of the personalistic norm. See, there we go. Now, this is how we understand, again, Catholic morality, Catholic teaching and everything. It starts with, again, that's what the theology of the body is about. Who is the human person? What is a person? And what is then the only legitimate response to a human person, which is the whole title of the book. And that's his whole message, love and responsibility. See, that's the key. If we're talking about persons then, and then this is where we can answer our critics and beat them in arguments, all that. If your starting point is the person, then we have to ask them, well, what does a person deserve? What is honest to a person? We're not talking about an animal or a plant. We're talking about a person. See, that's the key. It's the starting point. The starting point. And the starting point is what we have as Catholics And what John Paul was trying to communicate to the world does not have that starting point, and that's the problem. That's why our arguments are parallel. They never meet. They'll never understand it. They can't understand us because they don't come from the same starting point. They don't speak the same language, to put it simply. Our language is the sacramental nature of all creation, especially in the person. Everything flows from that. If you don't think, see, speak sacramentally, you're on a whole parallel plane, and you will not understand what we're saying. The whole key, what John Paul was trying to do, is to get the world to understand what it is to see sacramentally. That's the key. That is the soul of our faith. Which is why I say, and I mean it, I say it kind of like, whatever, hyperbole for effect, but I'm dedicated to world domination. We have to make the whole world Catholic for things to go well. Only because it's not trying to coerce people into some institution. It's helping the world to see life correctly, especially the human person. The personalistic norm. Okay? The two things go together. Whether a person of the other sex is regarded as an object representing only a sexual value, the institution of marriage will be treated as though it is based on and serves that value alone, not as a means of bringing two people together in a union of persons. See the difference? Man is a being endowed with the capacity for conceptual thought and so capable of having, in accordance with general principles, capable of behaving in accordance with general principles. In light of these principles, that is to say, if we adhere consistently to the personalistic norm, we must admit that where there are serious reasons, marital infidelity is a particularly serious one, why husband and wife cannot go on living together, there is only one possibility. And here's the interesting part here. Separation, but without the dissolution of marriage itself. See that? Separation, but not the dissolution of marriage itself. Obviously, when separation is an evil, a necessary evil. If we take the view that marriage is of its nature a lasting union of man and woman, however, this evil does not negate the personalistic norm. Neither of the persons, and it is the woman who is more at risk, as number 3, is put in the position of an object of use for the other. This would be the case if a person could abandon the person to whom he or she had legally belonged in marriage and marry them during the lifetime of his former spouse. Marry again during the lifetime of his former spouse. But if the partners to a marriage merely withdraw from it and from their conjugal and family life together and do not conclude marriages with other persons, there is no breach of the personalistic norm. The person is not degraded to the status of an object of use, and marriage preserves its character as an institution facilitating the personal union of man and woman, and not merely sexual relations between them. In other words, translated, what he's saying is, we shouldn't be getting divorced. We shouldn't be trying to break that union. Separating from it because it is so, hurtful, dysfunction, whatever, and harmful, yes. But still, there's a bond. The ideal thing would be not to divorce and just to remain, okay, I'm still married, but we don't live together. And I don't live with somebody else. I don't get rid of it because it's open to, as you said, it's open to vulnerability of using a person. Okay, I'm done with this person. I got everything I could out of them, tired of them. Now I want a divorce. I'm going to that person. That person's more attractive now. And this is what happens a lot today. People try marriage out. That's why so many marriages fail in the first few years now. Because it's not on the personalistic norm. As much as we try to get that across to them in pre-Cana, their ethos is already formed along this non-personalistic line. And so they approach marriage that way. And then it reminds me of like taking an orange or something and squeezing all the juice out of it. You're left with the pulp and you just throw it away. That's what we do. We squeeze the juice out of each other, and then we throw each other away. The saddest part about that is there's so many children that become victims in that. That's the saddest part.
We just with my sister, and she told us in October, marriage on the eve of her 26th wedding anniversary. Killed her and then shot himself. And they have 4 children. And my sister knew her. And she wrote to the children and said she knew both of them. She loved them both. And she had to write the letter. The church was packed at her funeral. They just had, he had bipolar.
Mm-hmm.
He was mentally abusive in
Yeah.
a situation.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about an abusive spouse.
Yeah. Business.
He didn't probably get treatment or help, but they didn't separate.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended in this terrible tragedy. And John Paul II would have said to separate.
Yeah, definitely would have said separate.
Leave
Yeah.
the bond.
Yeah, leave the bond.
Think of those children.
Yeah.
For that acknowledgement.
Yeah.
But it is 25 years. We were out in the 25th anniversary.
Oh.
It's not,
Yeah.
it isn't something that just happened thoroughly.
Right. Right.
It's something in our culture that, and he sent a letter out to everybody saying it was all their fault.
Oh, yeah. Everybody else. Yeah, the culture. Yeah. Well, he was right in one sense that it's our fault as a culture, meaning because we're so non-sacramental.
We're non-sacramental, and these are things that are going to happen more
They
often.
are.
I'm afraid.
Absolutely, they are.
I'm afraid it's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Because you can't explain some of these tragedies. They're women killing their children. These abuses. The things are just unbelievable because these are, again, it's a view. We're very predatorial. How about the whole Penn State thing? Paternal or Sandusky? Oh yeah, that's interesting. They have that.
Oh no.
Really?
Yeah. Now there's, well, obviously that's the first thing that came to mind, right?
Oh, it's huge. It'll huge.
The wife, I've never heard the wife speak.
Something. And then you have like, yeah. What is Didn't he have? We're talking about the Penn State thing for the people. Just digressing for a second, because it is very exemplary. Exemplary of a lot of things, our culture. It's exemplary of false idols. What happens with false idols? Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Really, it is. It's football and Penn State, all the money it brings in, so anything can just be, oh, don't look at me. And now, you're right, it crumbles. It's crumbled. Oh my, this man at 84, my father's 84 years old. What's he do? At this, to go out in your life like this, after he was this icon of icons, and then. Oh, yeah, it's staggering, but a lot of people at the church are breathing a sigh of relief. It's not us this time.
Well, the media would
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, yeah, the church would say separate. See, I know we get a lot of divorces lately. A lot of people remarry. But really, if you take what he's saying here, and again, John Paul is the soul of the church. You look at John Paul, listen to him, you're hearing the church, the soul of the church speaking. The soul of the church is, when you work it down, it's don't break the bond. Separate, but don't break the bond. Yes, they allow it because it's like we've twisted the church's arm. Like, for instance, one of the grounds for annulments today, one of the most common grounds, and in fact, it's so common in our culture that Rome is trying to crack down on it. There's, when you annul marriage, you have to do it on different grounds. It's just like civil court, like you see court. Well, civil court learned from the church jurisprudence. Like, okay, it's called attacking the bond. Okay, like you're saying, like this bond, as it were, is guilty. It needs to be broken. So you have to have grounds. You have to prove the grounds through witnesses and by your testimony. Witnesses are very key in annulments. And one of the grounds is called lack of due discretion. And it's either lack of due discretion, you say, on the part of both parties or one or the other. Which, as you can see, can be a very general term, but it's very general, but it's very applicable in one sense. Too applicable in our culture. People just don't have the discretion. They don't. In other words, basically, they just didn't get what marriage is about. And Rome's having a problem with it because so many of these moments are coming in. Lack of due discretion. There's another one like that. It just people don't get it. One canon lawyer friend of mine once said, you can almost automatically annul all 90% of marriages in America just by the fact that they occurred in America. Yeah, because if the grounds for annulment is, to put it simply, was this marriage sacramental? Who comes to a marriage with sacramental understanding today? Yeah, exactly, and that's why they said basically you just next. Oh, did you get married in America? Next. There's your grounds.
And then you hear about the guys that my sister got on. It's really easy.
Was it? Oh.
Pretty quick.
It depends. Sometimes it depends on the cases. There's certain cases that are kind of like, oh yeah.
But you hear that some guys, oh yeah, this guy's
Yeah, you do. One interesting case, a couple cases I had, I talked with a kennel lawyer who was an expert in this area, and I had to deal with this in one. Fortunately, it worked out okay, but I had to kind of warn a bride one time that with the wars going on, about the men coming back from war and their inability to attach, for intimacy because of that. Or if they were in war and they're going to be married, it's a real red flag. You got to really look at that because they may be have an inability to really be intimate. I mean emotionally. So that's another factor. So okay, last paragraph in 214. We must accept that in their conjugal life, a man and a woman united as person, and that their union therefore lasts as long as they live. We cannot accept that their union lasts only as long as the persons themselves wish it to last. For that would be a contradiction of the personalistic norm, which is based on the concept that the person is a primary being. From this point of view, a man and a woman who have lived as husband and wife within the framework of a valid marriage are joined in a union which only the death of one of them can dissolve. And the fact that one or even both of them may cease in course of time to want this does nothing to alter the situation. Their change of mind cannot cancel the fact that they are objectively united as man and woman. One or both of them may cease to feel that there is any subjective justification for this union and gradually fall into a state of mind which is psychologically or both psychologically and physiologically incompatible with it. Such a condition warrants separation from bed and table, but cannot annul the fact that they are objectively united and united in wedlock. The personalistic norm which takes precedence of the will and the decisions of either of the persons concerned demands that the union be maintained until death. Any other view of the matter, in effect, puts the person in the position of an object for use, which amounts to the destruction of the objective order of love, in which the supra-utilitarian value of the person is affirmed. So basically, it's, we're marrying and using and then dumping. Marrying, using, and dumping. Marrying, using, and dumping. So you see, you're really getting the insight to the church allows what they call annulment. They don't really recognize divorce. Legally it's divorce, but it's annulment. But it's in its soul, the church really is hesitant. It's only conceding to these annulments by the fact that it has to. It's like, well, because a lot of this does presume a spiritual marriage. Just like in pre-Cana, when you have these little you take some of these little, I have one that I use, like a little inventory, and the couples are asked questions. And one of the questions is there on those things is, would adultery end our marriage? And of course, the answer they want you to give is no. But yeah, or one of the others says, yeah.
else went over the top.
Yeah, they do. Which is good in one sense. I still, you know, but you're right. But it's precise what he's saying. How even in that case, it's not a matter. And I can tell a couple. Adultery is symptom. It's a warning flag. It's symptomatic of something. The problem is the adultery. Yeah.
Is that a multiple choice?
Yeah.
Agree, disagree, or
Divorce, separate?
Yeah, that's it. You agree or you agree, disagree, or unsure of the question.
yeah, so that's when it's the for work. Marriage is better for work.
Yeah.
Pieces.
Yeah.
You pick up the pieces at that point.
Yeah. You do. And so many people. Have you noticed how many people who are divorced will say, you know, we get along so much better since we're divorced. You know, we're like great friends now. You know, well, that's why you should have stayed together and kind of worked it. And you're doing now what you should have done at the beginning all along. Just that somehow stepping back from this thing enabled you to do that. Okay.
We're meeting with a couple Monday nights. we do this
Oh.
routine.
Oh, good.
But you're right. Who comes to it knowing what sacramental marriage is?
Yeah. They do. They do.
Okay, you're not going to get it.
And you know, I have to admit, as a priest, I can count on probably one hand in all years of priesthood the ones that really come to it sacramentally, and it is the most beautiful thing. It is just wonderful. And working with them in their marriages, they're the least demanding, because you know priests hate weddings because they love marriage. You know what I mean? They hate what is done to it, that is so much beyond our control, or it has seized control, you know, that we have to fight with and wrestle with and just kind of grin and bear it, you know. And when you have a couple that really knows it, it's amazing. When they know it, everything else about their wedding is consistent with that. You don't have to fight them on anything. They're perfect. They don't care about these little things, you know. It's all about what really matters. Whereas when they don't have a sacramental, it's dead on every time. They are so adamant about the stupidest, silliest things that have nothing to do with the wedding, the silly things, you know, they want things that the church really can't do, and they want you to bend, and it's just demand after demand, you know, that you have to kind of fight with them, or you know, bend as far as you can and grit your teeth, you know. But when they have the faith, there's none of that. It's amazing. I had a wedding like that recently where every issue I came to, everything I had to ask and all that normally would be, you know, potential for a fight, you know. Oh no, that's okay, Father. No, we don't care about that. We care about this. So, oh, praise God, thank you. And that's how they all should be. But it's in our culture, it's hard.
Don't you think so? It can keep you choose even at the age of 25.
Oh yeah, it can. Yeah, we have to keep doing, especially in theology of the body, because that's what really turns the lights on people, you know. But most importantly, we have to create a whole other generation from the ground, you know, from birth up, that just so that you walk into it. In other words, the couples that come to marriage and are so good to work with are ones that have been raised in the ethos, so they're just basically walking serenely into marriage. It isn't just like, here's how you're living. Oh, put on the brakes now. We got to talk about marriage and get your mind right about marriage, you know, because it's so different than the way you've been living. You know, it's not that when you have faith. When you're growing up with that ethos, you just it's just the next logic. It's just the next easy step. It's wonderful. So, okay. Okay, let's go to the second paragraph in 215. Conversely, the objective order is preserved in the principle of strict monogamy, which is identical with the indissolubility of lawful marriages. It is a difficult principle to observe, but an indispensable one, if the life together of persons of different sex and ultimately human life at large, which is to such a great extent based on this relationship, are to be raised to the level of the person and accommodated within the bounds of love. Okay, yeah, it's different. It's a challenge, difficult, but anything worthwhile is. Otherwise, why we have the age-old helps, you know, prayer, fasting, the sacraments. Spiritual reading, a good bookstore like this one, the Pauline books, where you can feed your soul on the good books they have here. Only here, exclusively here. We are, of course, concerned here with love in its full objective sense. Love is a virtue, not only in its subjective psychological sense. The difficulty of applying the principle of monogamy and the indissolubility of marriage arises because love is so often understood and practiced exclusively in the second rather than the first tense. See, the subjective, it's practiced more like the subjective. It's just what I feel. The principle of monogamy and the indissolubility of marriage make necessary the integration of love. Without integration, marriage is an enormous risk. A man and woman whose love has not begun to mature, has not established itself as a genuine union of persons, should not marry, for they are not ready to undergo the test to which married life will subject them. Now this goes back to one of your questions, the next sentence. This does not, however, mean that their love must have reached full maturity at the moment of marriage, but only that it must be ripe enough for its continued ripening in and through marriage to be ensured. Maybe that should be a new canon law grounds there. Marriage was not ripe enough. Relationship wasn't ripe enough for marriage. Renunciation of the good which monogamy and indissolubility represent is impossible not only from the supernatural standpoint, the standpoint of faith, but equally for purely rational and human reasons. What is at stake is the superiority of the value of the person to the value of sex as such, and the application of the norm in a context in which it can easily be ousted by the utilitarian principle. Strict monogamy is a function of the personal order. See? In other words, why should you have only one wife or husband? Because you're a person. And it's a function of being, it's natural to being a person. And how do we find ourselves as a person? By making a full, faithful, free, fruitful gift of self. And you only got one self to give away. So you can only give it to one person. At least in earthly marriage. Sister and I give it to all people, but still it's all people who are at the same time one spouse for us in Christ. So we do it in a mystical way. Okay, we've given ourselves away to one bride or bridegroom, but in a mystical way. We're not practicing spiritual polygamy. Okay, now the value of the institution. I just wanted to, just before I get into that, I would just refer a little bit to John Paul II's Theology of the Body. And this would be, well, I just say this much, that let's see. Okay, I'll read just one paragraph from here. This is, this is talk number 35. If you've got the Theology of the Body book, talk number 35, if you're referring to it. Very significant is the situation in which Christ takes the side of the woman caught in adultery and defends her from stoning. He says to the accusers, "Let the one among you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." When they drop the stones and go away, he says to the woman, "Go, and from now on do not sin again." Christ therefore clearly identified adultery as sin. By contrast, when he turns to the ones who wanted to stone the adulteress, he does not appeal to the prescriptions of Israelite law, but only to conscience. The discernment of good and evil inscribed in human conscience can turn out to be deeper and more correct than the content of a legal norm. As we have seen, the history of the people of God in the Old Covenant unfolded to a remarkable degree outside the normative content placed by God in the commandment, "You should not commit adultery." It bypasses, so to speak. Christ wants to correct this distortion, hence the words spoken by him on the Sermon on the Mount. He goes into more detail, like he did here, about that this whole thing about, and sometimes people do that, they do justify polygamy in the Bible. well, these great people. Abraham had more than one wife, and Solomon, and but it was because of, at the time, they digressed from the original, from what Christ intended at the beginning, and they had this. They were real concerned about this whole thing of progeny. And one of the reasons they were concerned about progeny is because everybody's progeny had the potential of being the Messiah. See? Plus, and the barren womb was very, very, very shameful. So at all costs, even if it meant having a surrogate mother, like Rebecca did and Sarah, they still had a progeny. They wanted to, so Christ corrects that, taking them before the law. To the value of the institution itself, marriage is an institution. All right, we'll see what that means. Some interesting words will come up here in some of these sections here from the Latin. These considerations are on page 216. These considerations make it easier for us to understand the value of marriage as an institution, for it must be seen as an institution, not married to a de facto sexual relation between a man and a woman. Although there can be no doubt that the physical relationship between two people is of decisive importance to the institution, hence the old Latin, matrimonium facit copula, it is nonetheless true that outside the institutional framework, such a relationship does not constitute a marriage. The word institution denotes something instituted, established, in accordance with the concept of justice. See, there's the meaning of words again. Oh, church is just an institution. Yeah, what's that word mean? It's a very rich word. Something established in accordance with the concept of justice. Now we know that the order of justice affects both interpersonal matters and social matters. Commutative justice and social justice. Marriage is in fact both an interpersonal and a social concern. So it's not just my private choice. It's, yes, there is an internal dimension, but also an external dimension. A sexual relation, now this is going to be a great section we're going to get into for the whole argument about the whole same-sex marriage thing. A sexual relation between a man and a woman necessarily has an intimate character for reasons already mentioned. Nevertheless, the parties to it belong to society and for many reasons must justify their relationship in the eyes of society. That is precisely what the institution of marriage does. We are not speaking here solely of justification in the sense of legalization of conforming to the law. Justify here means make just. Nor does this have anything to do with self-justification, pleading mitigating circumstances to excuse something intrinsically bad. So in other words, to make just. What does make just mean? Something that is just is what? It means it is correct in the eyes of God. It conforms to God's order, God's law. So marriage between two people needs to be proclaimed by society as a way of saying it is in the eyes of God. It is of God. It is just. Not just legally, but just meaning righteous, good, according to God. Then there's two people who can't just say they are. The culture has to say. An institution has to say. The need to justify sexual relations between man and woman in the eyes of society arises not only from the normal consequence of the relationship, but also in consideration of the partners themselves. Here we go again. Number 4. Especially the woman. The normal consequence of a sexual relationship between man and woman is progeny. A child is a new member of society to adopt, and where society is sufficiently highly organized, register. The birth of a child turns the union of a man and woman based on the sexual relationship into a family. The family is in itself a small society, and the existence of all large societies, nation, state, or church, depends on it. Obviously, any large society would keep a watchful eye on the process of its own ceaseless recruitment by way of the family. The family is the primary institution, the base of our existence as human beings. It forms part of the large society which it constantly helps to create, but also has its own distinct existence, its own character and ends. Both these characteristics, its immanence in society on the one hand, its peculiar autonomy and inviolability on the other, must find reflection in legislation. The point of departure must be the law of nature. Legislation concerning a family must objectively express the order implicit in its nature. This is what should be. I sound like a lawyer in defending marriage now in the court. This is what they should be saying, word for word. Now, the only thing is here, what we have to do though, we have to articulate this, which basically we are, like our Thomas More lawyers, the ones that are fighting now for the Catholic Charities, and also now the defense of marriage. By the way, I forgot to bring that. I'm involved in the defense of marriage now. They're trying to get petitions now in the parishes, so you can go online and get them and try to get someone in your parish to organize that. We want to get 300,000 signatures by next April. Yeah, that's the goal. And very important, you have to make sure that they sign up by county, that they sign the ones on for their county, and there's a couple cities like Chicago that have their own. So to make sure they live in Chicago, you got to sign under the Chicago one. It's all online. You can get the Illinois Defense of Marriage to go there. And I'll bring those things in. I just had a meeting with some of them. In fact, Mary Hackett was there. That's how I ended up talking yesterday, because she met me there, and the next day when needed a substitute, she called me. Yeah, it's more. It's yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the parishes. That's part of the problem is.
Stand up there and speak on it, and
Yeah.
so people don't start forming.
And speaking of that, I have some talking points for your pastors, by the way. Just stop 1 second here and pass this out, if you don't mind. This is also a little ad where I'm speaking about the Mission Messiah and the Magisterium. And there,
why don't you show one on the screen?
oh, okay. There's one there. This is December 1st. And I've also got talking points for, first of all, for hospice and hospital care. It's another issue too. We're basically right now. Basically, we are changing over to a basically euthanasia type approach to healthcare now in hospitals and hospice. So I have some things there. That it's very simple, but it's all there. And on this side, I have 13 points as to why we have to defend marriage, against same-sex unions and marriage. The reason these 13 points, what's key here is this. What we read so far here, as we'll go through and we'll see more, is the wonderful articulation of the theology, the natural, the correct reasoning according to natural law. We corner the market on that, obviously, as Catholics. But the thing is, this is the key, you have to be able to prove and show how not following this is going to hurt, be detrimental to society. You can see all this stuff. They don't care. They don't care. They say, oh yeah, that's okay. That may be intellectually correct and all that. Yeah, natural order. But I know what I feel and I want what I want. So what's the problem? Well, how's it hurting? How's it hurting? And he and I want to live together as married. That's what where we have to go. People will not be convinced unless you show them the hurt factor. And so here's 13 hurts. Okay, so I'll give that to you at the end of class then before you go. All right. Okay. Okay, I got 5 more minutes. Okay, last paragraph 217. The family is an institution based on marriage. It is impossible in a large society to legislate correctly for the family unless we define correctly the rights and duties which go with marriage. This, however, does not mean that marriage should be regarded as solely a means to an end, the end being the family. For though marriage in the natural course of things leads to the existence of a family, and though the possibility that it will do so must always be kept open, marriage itself is not, as a result, absorbed by and lost in a family. It retains its distinct existence as an institution whose inner structure is different than that of the family. The family has the structure of a society, which the father and the mother, too, each in his or own way, particular way, both exercise authority, while the children are subject to that authority. Marriage does not possess the structure of society, but an interpersonal structure. It is a union and community of two persons. Now, again, here's where we get into what we're trying to say to the same-sex thing. Marriage is what happens to a man and woman in marriage has a good that is unique to that relationship, that cannot be repeated or attained in a relationship between a man and a man. There's a specific good for the man and for the woman in that relationship that we know and is unique to marriage. The distinctive character of the institution of matrimony is preserved when the community of husband and wife expands to become a family. However, for a variety of reasons, this may not happen. The lack of family in no way deprives marriage of its proper character. The inner and essential raison d'etre of marriage is not simply eventual transformation to a family, but above all the creation of a lasting personal union between a man and a woman based on love. Marriage serves above all to preserve the existence of the species, as discussion in chapter 1 I showed, but it is based on love. A marriage which, through no fault of the spouses, is childless retains its full value as an institution. No doubt a marriage serves love more fully than it serves the cause of existence and develops into a family. This is how we should understand the statement that procreation is the principal end of marriage. But a marriage which cannot fulfill that purpose does not lose its significance as an institution of interpersonal character. Moreover, realization of the principal purpose of marriage demands that its interpersonal character be realized to the full. So the love of the spouses may be fully mature and creative. It should be added that if their love is already more or less ripe, procreation will ripen it still further. You see? Marriage is then a separate institution with a distinctive interpersonal structure. This institution grows into and becomes a family and can be identified up to a point with the family, though it would perhaps be better to say that just as the family makes its imprint on marriage, so marriage makes its characteristic mark on the family, in which it finds its confirmation and the means of attaining fulfillment. Thus, for example, an elderly couple who live with not only their own children, but children's families, and perhaps even great-grandchildren around them, still form a separate institution. Among this family hierarchy, at once a unit and an integral whole, existing and living by its own laws in accordance with its fundamental interpersonal character. That is what makes it an institution. The laws of which its existence is based must derive from the principles of the personalistic norm. For only in this way can the generally personal character of a unit of two persons be ensured. Now, one of the points he's going to make later, we'll see, is that there's a difference between, we're going to word, like next month, we'll get into the words about the actual meaning of the word matrimony and marriage, and here's again clever word uses. What word does the culture of death use with abortion? What word do they use? Choice for what kind of rights? Reproductive rights. He makes a distinction. We don't use the word reproduction. We use it as procreation. See the difference in the world? What's the difference? Reproduction is very utilitarian. It's something animals can do. Animalistic, right? Objective. See? Procreation implies a whole beautiful, magnificent world of relationship, cooperation between the two as persons, between us and God. See, it's a whole different. And see what it is in the words? And the key is in catching the words. Grab the words and hold people to it. Hold their feet to the word. Reproduction. You mean like a photo or crackers and things. What do you? Oh! You mean procreation? You have to do it like that,
Well, then, discussion related to this. Someone has asked me, this person online, about adoption of the child over one's own fertility for a third child. Is it wrong to want to help?
Over one's fertility?
Yeah, it sounds like we practice birth control before
Yeah.
we'll adopt some new child.
Yeah.
Is that justifying that? That's what it's interesting.
Yeah. No. You can do both as long as you're not precluding your own fertility. Openness to life. You can't say, well, we won't have life, whether by the natural rhythm or contraception, but will adopt somebody. No, you don't want to do that because that's not. See, when you're as long as you have been open to life, sufficiently open to life, you're not purposely trying not to stop it, so you can adopt. You can adopt as long as you're not in any way cutting yourself off from the potential of life between you and your husband. You understand the difference? In other words, let's say you have 5 children, and you can no longer have children, or your wife can't have any. Yeah, you can adopt because you can't have any. You can adopt an additional children, but you can't say, okay, we're going to contracept or not or abstain during fertile times, whatever. Do and then instead adopt. That would not be right. Yeah, because when you're married, your obligation by virtue of your marriage, your relationship, is for procreation to come from that union. That's your primary obligation. Your obligation isn't to like save the world, you know. Now, once if that obligation is being adhered to faithfully, yes, you can adopt, but you can't do it by compromising that obligation.
And I told everybody, we're going to have class again in December, but Sister Helena and I are going to be in a place listening to them, so there's nobody to do the tech stuff. So you can't say, oh, well, just log on and watch it from home, because there won't be any streaming.
Oh.
We'll be here live.
So you have to come and